Commander Jake Martinez stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the deck of Nexus Prime. The massive trading station stretched out before him like a small city floating in space. Thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds moved through the wide corridors. Some walked on two legs like humans, while others crawled on six or floated through the air using technology Jake could not understand. The air smelled strange. It carried the scent of exotic spices and alien foods mixed with the metallic smell of recycled atmosphere. Jake adjusted his uniform and checked the datapad in his hand. His mission was simple but important. Earth needed to join the Galactic Council. Without membership, humanity would remain isolated and weak compared to the great alien empires that controlled this part of space. Lieutenant Sophie Brooks walked beside him, carrying a case full of diplomatic documents. She looked nervous as aliens stared at them with eyes that came in colors Jake had never seen before. Some creatures had 4 arms, while others had tentacles instead of hands. A few floated past them without any visible means of support. "Sir, the meeting hall is this way," Sophie said, pointing down a corridor lined with shops selling goods from across the galaxy. Jake nodded and followed her through the crowd. He noticed how other beings stepped aside when certain aliens approached. The Zephyrians, with their hard shell-like skin and 4 powerful arms, commanded respect wherever they went. The tall Vorthan looked like living crystals, and their voices sounded like musical chimes. The snake-like Krell slithered past on their lower bodies, while their upper torsos remained upright. All of these species had been part of the Galactic Council for centuries. Earth had only made contact with alien life 10 years ago, and the first meetings had not gone well. Humanity had barely survived what the aliens called the contact wars. Most species viewed humans as weak and primitive. The meeting hall was enormous. Representatives from 20 different worlds sat around a circular table that could have held 100 people. Jake and Sophie took their assigned seats in a section marked for observers. They were not yet members, so they could only watch and listen. High Marshal Vex of the Zephyrian Empire stood to address the council. He was massive, even by Zephyrian standards. His 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through metal. His shell-like armor was decorated with symbols showing his many victories in battle. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the hall. "Today, we discussed trade routes through the Outer Rim," Vex announced. "Only species with proven strength should control these valuable passages. We cannot allow weak races to threaten our commerce." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The human trade proposal had been rejected 3 times already. Each time, the Council cited humanity's lack of military power as the reason. They wanted Earth to prove itself in battle before gaining any real voice in galactic affairs. The session continued for hours. Representatives argued about shipping schedules and protection fees. Jake watched and learned how the different species interacted. The Zephyrians dominated through intimidation. The Vorthan used logic and careful reasoning. The Krell relied on cunning and made deals that benefited them more than their partners. When the formal session ended, High Marshal Vex announced a dinner for all delegates. Jake and Sophie were invited as observers. The dining hall was even larger than the meeting room. Long tables groaned under the weight of foods from dozens of worlds. Some dishes moved on their own, while others glowed with soft light. Jake tried to eat carefully. Many alien foods could be poisonous to humans. Sophie had brought ration bars just in case, but Jake wanted to show respect for their hosts. He managed to find some fruits that tasted almost like Earth apples and vegetables that reminded him of carrots. The conversation around the tables was loud and friendly. Different species shared stories and made jokes that Jake did not understand. He noticed that whenever humans were mentioned, the tone changed. Voices became quieter and some aliens looked uncomfortable. High Marshal Vex stood up during the main course. The hall fell silent as all attention focused on the massive Zephyrian leader. His 4 arms gestured dramatically as he began to speak. "My friends, we have enjoyed good food and better company tonight," Vex said, "but I must address something that troubles me. There are some who believe that weak species should have the same rights as strong ones. They think that beings who cannot defend themselves, deserve protection from those who can. Jake felt every eye in the room turn toward him and Sophie. Vex was clearly talking about humanity. The High Marshal continued his speech with growing enthusiasm. The Zephyrian Empire has fought and won thousands of battles. We have earned our place at this table through strength and courage. Any species that wishes to join us must prove they possess the same qualities, the alien crowd murmured agreement. Several Zephyrians pounded the table with their claws. Vex raised one massive arm for silence. I challenge any human present to face our champion. War Prime Thax in the combat circle. If they can survive one round against him, then perhaps their species deserves consideration for council membership. The hall erupted in excited chatter. Sophie grabbed Jake's arm and whispered urgently in his ear. Sir, we should decline politely. Thax has never lost a fight. He has killed 17 opponents from different species. Jake stood up slowly. The room fell silent again as hundreds of alien eyes focused on him. He could feel the weight of their expectation. This moment would determine humanity's future in galactic politics. High Marshal Vex, Jake said in a clear voice that carried across the huge hall. I accept your challenge on behalf of the human race. Sophie's face went pale. Several aliens gasped in surprise. Vex's mandibles clicked in what Jake hoped was approval rather than hunger. Excellent, Vex boomed. The match will take place tomorrow at midday? The entire station is invited to watch. We shall see what human courage looks like. When faced with true Zephyrian strength, the dining hall exploded into conversation as aliens discussed this unexpected development. Jake sat down and tried to finish his meal while Sophie stared at him in shock. Sir, what have you done? She whispered. Thax will kill you in seconds. The diplomatic mission will be over before it really begins. Jake looked around the room at the excited faces of the alien delegates. They were already placing bets on how quickly he would die. Some thought he might last 30 seconds. Others were more pessimistic. Maybe, Jake said quietly to Sophie, but running away would prove their point about human weakness. Sometimes you have to take a stand even when the odds are against you. That night Jake lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling. Through the viewport he could see stars scattered across the darkness of space. Somewhere among them was Earth and his daughter, Amy. He wondered what she would think of her father's decision to fight an alien champion with no hope of victory. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or death, but tonight, Jake Martinez was at peace with his choice. Jake woke before dawn to the sound of his door chime. Sophie stood outside with a datapad and a cup of coffee that smelled like home. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep and worry lines creased her forehead. Sir, I have been researching War Prime. Thanks all night, she said as Jake led her into his quarters. The information is not encouraging. Jake took the coffee and sat down at his small desk. Outside the viewport, Nexus Prime bustled with activity as aliens from across the galaxy went about their daily business. Many of them would be spectators at today's match. Tell me what you found, Jake said. Though he suspected he would not like the answers, Sophie activated. Her datapad and a holographic image appeared above it. The figure was massive, even by Zephyrian standards. War Prime Thax stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms ending in claws designed for combat. His shell-like armor was scarred from countless battles but showed no signs of serious damage. Thax has fought in the combat circle 47 times, Sophie reported. He has never lost a match. 17 opponents died during their fights with him. The other 30 suffered injuries that ended their military careers. Jake studied the hologram as Sophie continued her briefing. Thax's preferred weapons included plasma claws that could cut through most known materials and kinetic hammers that generated enough force to shatter bone. His fighting style relied on overwhelming speed and power to end matches quickly. The combat circle has specific rules, Sophie explained. No outside weapons are allowed, but fighters can bring their own equipment. The match ends when one opponent surrenders, yields, or dies. There is no time limit. What about armor? Jake asked. Personal protection is permitted, but it must be standard military gear, not specialized combat equipment. Most fighters wear full battle suits with energy shields and life support systems. Jake nodded and continued studying the data. Several video recordings showed Thax in action against opponents from different species. Each fight followed the same pattern. Thax would charge forward with devastating speed and end the match within minutes through superior firepower and physical strength. "Sir, there is something else," Sophie said hesitantly. "Word of the challenge has spread throughout the station. Betting pools have opened and the odds are heavily against you. Most aliens are wagering on how many seconds you will survive rather than whether you can win." Jake was not surprised. Humans had a reputation for physical weakness compared to most galactic species. Earth gravity was lighter than the homeworlds of the Zephyrians, Vorthan, and Krell. Human muscle density and bone strength could not match beings who had evolved under harsher conditions. "What are the current odds?" Jake asked. 30 to 1 against survival, 500 to 1 against victory, Sophie replied. "Some betting pools are offering odds on whether you will last longer than 15 seconds, a soft chime indicated an incoming message. Jake activated his personal communicator and the image of High Marshal Vex appeared on the screen. The massive Zephyrian leader looked pleased with himself. "Commander Martinez, I trust you slept well," Vex said with what might have been humor. "I wanted to inform you that the entire Galactic Council will be present for today's match. Your performance will be remembered by every member species." Jake forced himself to remain calm. "I appreciate the notification, High Marshal. When and where should I report for the fight?" "The combat circle opens at midday station time. You may bring whatever personal equipment you wish within the established rules. War Prime Thax is already preparing for battle and looks forward to testing human courage." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with Sophie and the weight of impossible expectations. She pulled up more data on her pad showing the layout of the combat circle arena and the medical facilities that would be standing by. "Sir, I strongly recommend that you withdraw from this challenge," Sophie said. "The diplomatic consequences of your death could set back human relations with the Council by decades." Jake stood and walked to the viewport. Below him, the vast structure of Nexus Prime stretched away in all directions. Millions of beings lived and worked here, representing the diversity and power of galactic civilization. Somewhere among them, War Prime Thax was preparing to kill him in front of an audience that viewed humans as inferior. "What weapons will you choose?" Sophie asked. "Plasma rifles are standard for most species. Energy shields might give you some protection against his claws." Jake turned away from the window with a strange expression on his face. Sophie had worked with him for 3 years, but had never seen him look quite like this. There was determination in his eyes, but also something else she could not identify. "I will not be taking any weapons," Jake said quietly. Sophie stared at him in shock. "So that would be suicide. Even with the best human military equipment, your chances are minimal." "Without weapons, you have no chance at all, maybe," Jake replied. "But sometimes the best strategy is the one your opponent does not expect." He spent the next several hours in meditation rather than weapons training. This confused Sophie even more, but she had learned not to question her commander's methods completely. Jake reviewed files on human history and philosophy, rather than combat techniques or alien military tactics. Around mid-morning, aliens began gathering outside Jake's quarters. Word had spread that the human was about to attempt something that many considered impossible. Some wanted to get a close look at him before he died. Others were simply curious about human behavior under extreme stress. Sophie dispersed the crowd, but more kept arriving. Security forces from several species had to establish a perimeter to maintain order. The attention made Jake uncomfortable, but he tried to focus on his mental preparation. "Sir, it is time," Sophie announced at 15 minutes before noon. "The arena is ready, and the audience is in place." Jake put on his standard military uniform. Without any additional protection, he carried no weapons or defensive equipment of any kind. Sophie walked beside him through corridors filled with aliens eager to witness the spectacle. The combat circle arena was enormous. Tiered seating surrounded a circular platform 30 meters across. Energy barriers contained the fighting space and prevented outside interference. Jake estimated that nearly 10,000 beings had gathered to watch him fight. High Marshal Vex sat in an ornate viewing box with other council members. The Zephyrian leader raised one massive arm to quiet the crowd as Jake and Sophie approached. The arena entrance. Citizens of the galaxy, Vex announced through the arena's communication system. Today we witness a test of courage between species. Commander Martinez of Earth will face War Prime Fax in single combat. Let this match determine whether humanity deserves respect among the stars. Sophie squeezed Jake's arm as they reached the arena floor. Sir, please reconsider this decision. It is not too late to withdraw with honor. Jake looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to anticipation to barely concealed bloodlust. None of them expected him to survive the next few minutes. Take care of Amy if something happens to me, Jake said, referring to his 7-year-old daughter back on Earth. Tell her that her father was brave. War Prime Fax entered the arena from the opposite side. The crowd roared approval as the massive warrior performed a ritual display of his weapons and armor. His plasma claws gleamed under the arena lights, while kinetic hammers hung from his secondary arms. Every movement demonstrated lethal precision and overwhelming power. Jake walked to the center of the arena, carrying nothing but his courage and a small folded paper in his pocket. The paper contained a drawing his daughter had made showing a human and an alien standing together as friends. He hoped he would have a chance to show it to someone before he died. The ceremonial gong sounded and the match began. The gong's deep sound echoed through the arena as 10,000 alien voices fell silent. War Prime Fax stood at the edge of the combat circle with his forearms spread wide in a display of raw power. Plasma claws extended from his primary limbs, while kinetic hammers swung from his secondary arms. His scarred armor caught the arena lights and threw back deadly reflections. Jake stood 30 meters away, wearing only his standard uniform. No weapons hung from his belt, no armor protected his chest. No energy shield flickered around his body. The contrast between the two fighters was so extreme that several aliens in the audience made sounds of disbelief. Fax began his charge with a roar that shook the arena walls. His claws left glowing trails in the air as he crossed the distance between them in massive strides. The crowd leaned forward, expecting to see the human torn apart in seconds. Betting pools prepared to pay out on the shortest survival times, but Jake did not run. He did not dodge or raise his hands in defense. Instead, he stood perfectly still and waited for the Zephyrian champion to reach him. Some spectators thought fear had frozen him in place. Others wondered if humans possessed some hidden defensive ability they had not seen before. When Thax was only 3 meters away, something unexpected happened. Jake opened his mouth and spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the suddenly silent arena. War Prime Fax, he said calmly. Before you kill me, I want to tell you about my daughter Amy. The massive Zephyrian stumbled to a halt with his plasma claws mere inches from Jake's throat. Confusion replaced bloodlust in his compound eyes. This was not how combat was supposed to proceed. Opponents were meant to fight back or flee in terror. They were not supposed to speak about their families. The arena fell completely silent. High Marshal Vex leaned forward in his viewing box, trying to understand what was happening. The crowd held its breath as Jake continued speaking in the same calm tone. Amy is 7 years old, Jake said. She loves to draw pictures of alien species she has seen in our database. Last week she drew a Zephyrian warrior and asked me if they were as brave as the stories say. I told her they were the bravest warriors in the galaxy. Thax's mandibles twitched with uncertainty. His training had prepared him for every type of combat situation except this one. No opponent had ever tried to have a conversation while staring down plasma claws. The War Prime's primary arms wavered slightly as Jake took a small step forward. She also asked me something else, Jake continued. She wanted to know if brave warriors ever get tired of fighting. If they ever wonder what it would be like to build something instead of destroying it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as aliens tried to process what they were witnessing. Some thought the human had lost his mind from fear. Others wondered if this was some clever strategy they did not understand. High Marshal Vex's face showed growing anger as his champion hesitated instead of finishing the fight. Jake took another step closer to Thax. The plasma claws could have cut him in half with a single motion, but the Zephyrian warrior seemed paralyzed by confusion. Jake's words were doing something that no weapon had ever accomplished. They were making Thax think about things he had buried deep in his warrior's mind. "I have studied your species, Thax," Jake said. "I know about the Zephyrian concept of Kethmar, the warrior's burden, the weight that builds in a fighter's soul with each victory and each death they cause. I can see it in your eyes, War Prime." How heavy has that burden become? The crowd noise faded to absolute silence. Even the arena's background system seemed to hold their breath. Thax stared at Jake with eyes that suddenly looked very tired. The human had spoken of something that Zephyrian warriors were forbidden to discuss. The burden of killing was real, but acknowledging it was considered weakness. Jake was now within arm's reach of the deadly warrior. One swing from those plasma claws would end his life instantly. But instead of attacking, Thax seemed to be listening to something he had never heard before. Someone was talking to him about the pain he carried instead of challenging him to add more. "You know what I'm talking about," Jake said softly. "Every warrior carries this weight. The question is, what do you do with it? Do you let it crush you? Or do you transform it into something else?" Thax's secondary arms lowered slightly. The kinetic hammers that could shatter bone hung loose at his sides. His compound eyes fixed on Jake's face as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The human showed no fear despite being close enough to touch death. Sophie watched from the diplomatic viewing area with her hands pressed to her mouth. She could not understand what Jake was trying to accomplish, but she could see the effect his words were having on the massive alien warrior. Thax was beginning to tremble, but not with rage. Something deeper was stirring in the Zephyrian's mind. High Marshal Vex stood up in his viewing box. His voice boomed across the arena, carrying frustration and growing anger. "Thax, what are you doing? Kill the human and end this mockery." But War Prime Thax seemed not to hear his leader's command. His attention remained focused entirely on Jake, who continued speaking in the same gentle tone. The human's words cut through millennia of Zephyrian military conditioning like a blade through armor. "I see warriors from many species here today," Jake said, looking around the arena. "All of them know about the burden. The Vorthen call it Crystal Song. The Krell name it Scale Shadow. Every fighting race has words for the weight that comes with taking life." Several alien warriors in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Jake was speaking truths that were rarely acknowledged in public. The cost of violence was something soldiers understood but seldom discussed. Admitting to doubt or regret was seen as weakness by most military cultures. Jake reached slowly into his uniform pocket. The movement should have triggered Thax's combat reflexes, but the Zephyrian remained motionless. Jake withdrew a small folded paper and held it where Thax could see it. "This is something Amy made for you," Jake said. "She drew it before I left Earth. She told me to give it to the warrior who might become her friend." Thax stared at the folded paper with eyes that had seen too much death. His plasma claws retracted slowly as Jake unfolded the drawing to reveal a simple picture made with children's crayons. It showed a small human girl standing next to a Zephyrian warrior. Both figures were smiling. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "For the brave warrior who might become my friend." The arena erupted in confused chatter as aliens tried to understand what was happening. This was supposed to be a battle to the death between species. Instead, they were watching something none of them had expected. A human was offering friendship to a warrior whose job was to kill him. War Prime Thax reached out with one massive claw and gently took the drawing from Jake's hands. He studied it with an expression that no one in the arena had ever seen on a Zephyrian face before. The hardened killer was looking at a picture that showed him as something other than an instrument of death. "She believes that the bravest thing a warrior can do is not to win another fight," Jake said. "It is to choose when not to fight at all." The transformation in Thax was visible to everyone watching. The massive warrior's shoulders sagged as if a great weight was settling on them. His remaining weapons lowered until they pointed at the arena floor instead of at Jake, something fundamental was changing in the mind of the galaxy's most feared fighter. Hi. Marshal Vex was shouting commands from his viewing box, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Thax heard only Jake's words and the sound of his own heartbeat growing louder in his ears. War Prime Thax held the child's drawing in his massive claws as if it were made of the most precious crystal in the galaxy. His compound eyes studied every crayon mark and every carefully drawn line. The simple picture showed him standing beside a small human girl, both of them smiling in a way that suggested friendship rather than fear. Jake watched the transformation taking place in the alien warrior's mind. 47 victories in the combat circle had built walls around Thax's heart, but a 7-year-old girl's artwork was finding cracks in those defenses. The massive Zephyrian's breathing had changed from the rapid pants of a predator to the deeper rhythm of someone lost in unexpected emotion. "You speak of forbidden things," Thax whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the silent arena. "Warriors do not speak of doubt or burden or the weight of killing, but you carry that weight nonetheless," Jake replied gently. "Every warrior does. The question is, what do you do with it? Do you let it crush you beneath victories that feel more like defeats, or do you transform it into something that builds instead of destroys?" High Marshal Vex was shouting orders from his viewing box, but his voice seemed to bounce off the energy barrier surrounding the combat circle. Other Zephyrian officials were standing and making urgent gestures, but Thax paid them no attention. His entire focus remained on Jake and the impossible conversation they were having. Sophie watched from the diplomatic section with tears forming in her eyes. She finally understood what Jake was trying to accomplish. He was not fighting Thax with weapons or violence. He was fighting the system that had turned a thinking being into nothing more than a killing machine. The battle was not for Thax's body, but for his soul. "How do you know these things?" Thax asked Jake. "Humans are supposed to be weak and primitive. You should not understand the burdens that warriors carry." Jake took another small step forward, until he was close enough to touch the alien's armored chest. Around them the arena held its breath as 10,000 beings waited to see what would happen next. Betting pools had stopped accepting wagers because no one knew how to calculate odds for what they were witnessing. "We understand because we have carried the same burden," Jake said. "Human history is full of warriors who won every battle but lost pieces of themselves with each victory. We learn that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and when it is not." Thax's remaining weapons lowered further until they hung loose at his sides. The kinetic hammers that could shatter bone and the plasma claws that could cut through starship armor were pointed at the arena floor. For the first time in his military career, the War Prime was thinking about something other than victory and death. "I have killed so many," Thax said so quietly that only Jake could hear. 17 in this arena and hundreds more in battle. Each face stays with me in the darkness when sleep will not come. Each voice calls out in my dreams, asking why their death was necessary." Jake nodded with understanding. "That is the voice of your conscience trying to heal the damage that violence does to the spirit. Most warriors learn to ignore it or bury it beneath duty and honor. But it never really goes away, does it?" "Never," Thax admitted. "It grows stronger with each kill. Sometimes I wonder if the next opponent will be the one who finally ends my torment by ending my life." The crowd was becoming restless. This was supposed to be entertainment, not therapy. Aliens who had placed bets on a quick, violent death were growing angry at the delay. Some were demanding refunds while others called for officials to intervene and force the fight to continue. But Jake and Thax seemed to exist in a bubble of calm at the center of the storm. They stood facing each other like old friends, sharing secrets rather than enemies preparing for battle. The energy barrier that contained the combat circle also seemed to contain their conversation, protecting it from outside interference. "What would happen if you chose not to fight?" Jake asked. What would happen if War Prime Thax decided that he had carried the burden long enough? "I would be stripped of rank and exiled from Zephyrian space," Thax replied without hesitation. "No warrior has ever refused a challenge in the combat circle. It would be considered the ultimate disgrace, And yet here you stand talking instead of killing, Jake pointed out. Perhaps disgrace is just another word for choosing a different path. Thax looked around the arena at the thousands of faces staring down at them. Most showed confusion and growing impatience. His own people looked angry and embarrassed. High Marshal Vex was making threatening gestures that clearly meant dire consequences would follow if Thax did not complete his mission. They expect me to kill you, Thax said. Your death would prove human weakness and Zephyrian superiority. That is how the system works. The system works by turning thinking beings into tools for others to use, Jake replied. But you are more than a tool, Thax. You are a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams of your own. What would you dream about if killing was not part of your life? The question hit Thax like a physical blow. No one had ever asked him about dreams or hopes or anything beyond his next victory. Zephyrian warriors were trained from childhood to think only of battle and honor. Personal desires were considered selfish and weak. I used to build things, Thax said slowly, as if remembering something from very long ago. Before military training, I made sculptures from crystal formations. My hands were used to create beauty instead of death. They still could be, Jake said. It is never too late to choose a different path. Around them, the crowd was growing more agitated. Security forces were moving closer to the arena as officials debated whether to intervene. Some aliens were leaving their seats in disgust, while others remained transfixed by the impossible scene playing out before them. High Marshal Vex activated the arena's communication system. His voice boomed across the space, carrying authority and barely controlled rage. War Prime Thax, you will complete this combat immediately. Kill the human and restore honor to our people. But Thax was no longer listening to his commanding officer. He was staring at the child's drawing in his hands and thinking about crystal sculptures and dreams he had buried beneath decades of violence. The weight of all his victories was settling on his shoulders like a mountain, but for the first time, it felt like something he might be able to set down. What happens if I choose not to kill you? Thax asked Jake. What happens if I walk away from everything I have been trained to be? Then you become something new, Jake replied. Something that you choose to be instead of something that others have made you into. The moment of decision had arrived. 10,000 beings held their breath as War Prime Thax stood at the crossroads between his past and his future. In one direction lay continued service as a killing machine. In the other lay unknown possibilities and the chance to heal wounds he had carried for too long. Slowly, deliberately, Thax began removing his remaining weapons and setting them on the arena floor. The sound of weapons hitting the arena floor echoed through the silent combat circle like thunder. Kinetic hammers and plasma claws clattered against the metal surface as War Prime Thax systematically disarmed himself. Each piece of equipment that fell represented decades of training and conditioning being cast aside. The crowd erupted in chaos. Aliens who had never seen a Zephyrian warrior surrender could not process what they were witnessing. Some shouted in anger while others sat in stunned silence. Betting pools crashed as odds became meaningless. Security forces moved closer to the arena but stopped at the energy barrier, unsure of their authority to intervene. High Marshal Vex was screaming commands from his viewing box, but Thax no longer heard his voice. The massive warrior's attention remained focused on Jake and the child's drawing he still held carefully in his claws. For the first time in his adult life, Thax was making a choice based on his own desires rather than military orders. The human speaks truth, Thax announced, in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. I have carried the burden of death for too long. I choose to set it down. The transformation was visible to everyone watching. The deadly predator who had entered the combat circle was becoming something else entirely. Thax's posture changed from aggressive to peaceful. His eyes lost their predatory focus and began to show vulnerability that no Zephyrian warrior was supposed to possess. Jake stepped forward and offered his hand in the traditional human gesture of friendship. Thax stared at the small appendage for a moment, then reached out with one massive claw to accept the handshake. The size difference was enormous, but the gesture carried meaning that transcended species barriers. What happens now? Thax asked quietly. I have defied everything my people believe in. There will be consequences. There always are when someone chooses to change, Jake replied. But those consequences belong to you now instead of to those who have been controlling your life. That is what freedom means. Sophie watched from the diplomatic section with tears streaming down her face. Her commander had accomplished something that seemed impossible. He had won a fight without throwing a single punch. More importantly, he had saved both his own life and the soul of his opponent. The crowd was beginning to settle into confused, murmuring as aliens tried to understand what they had witnessed. Representatives from different species huddled together discussing the implications. Some seemed angry while others appeared thoughtful. A few looked impressed, despite themselves. High Marshal Vex activated his personal communication device and began issuing orders to Zephyrian security forces. His intention was clearly to arrest Thax for cowardice and disgrace. But before his troops could move, War Prime Thax made another unexpected decision. The massive warrior knelt down on the arena floor in front of Jake. It was the traditional Zephyrian posture of honor, reserved for acknowledging a superior opponent. The crowd gasped as Thax lowered his head and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the arena's audio system. The human has defeated me without raising a hand, without drawing a weapon, and without spilling blood, Thax announced. This is a victory I could never achieve no matter how many opponents I destroyed. I acknowledged Jake Martinez as the superior warrior. The arena fell completely silent. Even High Marshal Vex stopped shouting orders as the full impact of Thax's words sank in. According to Zephyrian tradition, the combat circle had ended in human victory. Jake had not only survived, but had won through methods that no alien species had ever considered. Jake helped Thax back to his feet, and together they faced the stunned audience. The sight of human and Zephyrian standing side by side as allies, instead of enemies, sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. Everything they thought they knew about both species was being challenged by what they had witnessed. This match is concluded, Jake announced, addressing the crowd. War Prime Thax has chosen honor over violence and wisdom over tradition. I hope other warriors throughout the galaxy will find the courage to make similar choices. High Marshal Vex was apoplectic with rage. He activated the arena's communication system one final time, and his voice boomed across the space, carrying threats and condemnation. This mockery will not stand. Thax will face court-martial for cowardice. The human victory is meaningless because it was achieved through trickery rather than strength, but other voices were beginning to speak up from the crowd. A Vorthan delegate stood and addressed the arena. The combat was conducted according to established rules. No deception was used. The human achieved victory through intelligence and compassion. These are qualities that deserve respect. A Krell representative slithered forward to add their opinion. We have witnessed something unprecedented. Perhaps it is time to reconsider our definitions of strength and courage. The ability to choose peace over violence may be the greatest warrior skill of all. More delegates began voicing support for Jake's methods. The initial shock was giving way to thoughtful consideration of what they had seen. Some aliens remained skeptical, but others were clearly impressed by the human's ability to achieve victory without causing harm. Thax removed a small device from his armor and handed it to Jake. This contains the access codes to my personal quarters on Nexus Prime, he said. I will not be needing them anymore. Inside you will find examples of the crystal sculptures I mentioned. Perhaps your daughter would like to see what Zephyrian hands can create instead of destroy. Jake accepted the device with gratitude. Amy would be honored to see your artwork. I think she would also like to meet the warrior who chose friendship over fighting. I would welcome that meeting, Thax replied. If the human government permits, I would like to request transport to Earth. There are things I wish to learn about your species and your philosophy. Sophie made her way down from the diplomatic section to join Jake on the arena floor. Her face showed amazement and pride in equal measure. Sir, the Galactic Council is requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the implications of what happened here. Today, Jake looked around the arena at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Some showed anger and rejection, but others displayed curiosity and grudging respect. The seeds of change had been planted and would continue growing long after this day ended. "Tell the Council that humanity is ready to discuss our place in galactic affairs," Jake said. "But we will do so as equals, not as supplicants begging for acceptance." High Marshal Vex stormed out of his viewing box, followed by loyal Zephyrian officials. But several other members of his delegation remained behind, clearly interested in learning more about human methods of conflict resolution. The Zephyrian Empire itself was beginning to show cracks as some warriors questioned whether endless violence was truly the path to honor. As Jake and Fax left the combat circle together, the crowd began to disperse. Some aliens departed in confusion, while others lingered to discuss what they had witnessed. The betting pools tried to determine how to handle wagers on an outcome that no one had predicted. In the days that followed, delegations from multiple species requested meetings with human representatives. They wanted to understand how Jake had achieved his impossible victory and whether similar methods could be applied to other conflicts. The galaxy was beginning to realize that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power but the ability to find common ground with former enemies. Thax became the first alien to request permanent residency on Earth. His application included a letter to Amy Martinez thanking her for the drawing that had changed his life. He also submitted examples of his crystal sculptures as proof that warriors could indeed become builders when given the chance. Jake returned to Earth as more than just a successful diplomat. He became the man who proved that sometimes the greatest victories are won not by being stronger than your opponent, but by being human enough to help them remember their own capacity for choice and change. The challenge that was meant to prove human weakness instead demonstrated humanity's unique gift for turning enemies into friends through understanding and compassion. In a galaxy full of warriors, Jake Martinez had shown that the real battle was not between species, but between the forces that divide and those that unite all thinking beings.